Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. Today's episode is dedicated to iron and the pancreas, how dysfunctional iron metabolism in the body can affect the pancreas, and laying out how over time that can lead to a state of diabetes. Now, if we have not met, my name's Bowie. I've had type 1 diabetes for over 21 years. I am healing naturally and sharing information as I go. I have built this podcast here off of my TikTok account, documenting all of the things that I'm finding in my search for a cure. If you are not already subscribed, I welcome you to. And if you're not already following me on TikTok, I suggest that you do that as well. YouTube's obviously my longer form content. TikTok is more tidbits and daily use kind of things for both diabetes and health in general. So I welcome you on both platforms. So let's go ahead and get started about iron and the pancreas. Now, it helps to have a background in some of the stuff that we'll talk about today. And I've gone through just about everything leading up to this. So we've gone over inflammation. We've gone over a typical state of iron metabolism. So what that looks like in a healthy body. We've talked about how iron can lead to inflammation, what a chronic state of iron overload can look like, as well as deciphering our metrics for measuring iron. You know, serum ferritin is kind of the golden standard that we've come to accept. In episode 14, I talk about how that may not be a great thing, and it may have misled us in diagnosing a lot of our chronic inflammatory conditions. So if you haven't watched them already, I recommend that you go back and do that. It's going to help you in talking about what we're talking about today. All right. So this is my master diagram. Now, this summarizes everything that lays out how I got to where I got in my theory, whatever you want to call it. And this is what it looks like. So if you look at the top there, see if I can get my face here. Good. If you look at the top left, all right, so these are all of the pro-inflammatory conditions along that left side margin, all of the pro-inflammatory things going on in our day-to-day lives, all right? So we've got enriched foods, supplements, unfiltered water, getting us excess reduced iron, all right? And we've learned that reduced iron is incredibly inflammatory, reactive in the body, and is something that needs to be counterbalanced with specific nutrients, vitamins, trace minerals, what have you. We've also got accelerants in our body, right? Making the inflammation worse. Things like hydrogenated oils, polyunsaturated fats, added sugar, heavy metals. I mean, the list goes on. And then, let's see if I can move my face again. There we go. And then an unnatural decrease in bioavailability of minerals and mineral imbalances. This is all played out in the processing of our food, the unnatural fertilization of our food. And, you know, if you look at what our food's being enriched with, those things have a role, but we've neglected any semblance of balance, right? And the fact that one nutrient, one vitamin needs 3 to 5 others to help it do its job, right? And we've kind of thrown that out the window now, where everyone has just entered such a state of imbalance that we are suffering for it, okay? So taking all that into account, you have all of those pro-inflammatory conditions. And when you combine that with a normal iron storage, you see that in the middle there, your liver is designed to hold iron. That's like the storage site It helps it mobilize it, goes to the bone marrow for red blood cell. It helps it get to the cell for cellular respiration. If there's more than is needed in the body, it's getting stored in the liver. Now, states of inflammation, states of excess iron, the iron can become too much for the liver to handle, right? So when that liver's storage capacity is reached, what does it do with it? Well, the thing about the liver is that it is incredibly connected in a number of different systems: the endocrine system, the digestive system, right? And all of the organs attached to those systems. So, I mean, there isn't anything it doesn't touch. The brain, the gallbladder, the intestine, the whole GI tract, the entire endocrine system, and all of our hormonal glands, the gonads, the connective tissue for our bones. It's the consequences of an affected liver are very widespread, right? So when the liver becomes iron overloaded, it needs to share it with something. It needs it to go someplace. Our body is not very good at getting rid of it. So what does it do? It hands it off. And because it's so well connected, it has such a wide reach with who it can share it with. Leads to oxidative stress, mineral dysregulation, inflammatory response, tissue damage, hormone dysregulation. If you look up iron overload and any autoimmune condition today, there is a documented connection. Okay, and over time, this can lead to DNA damage, protein glycation, tissue damage, and ferroptosis, which is cell death caused by iron. Now, bit of a mouthful, and again, listen to episode 10 through 14. That's going to help you get the lowdown. But when we talk about the pancreas specifically, we have to know how it's supposed to look as a means of comparison for a dysfunctional state, right? So what's the relationship between iron and the pancreas? What does a normal pancreas look like in terms of its iron load? What clues can we take from that normal state that give us an idea of what that would look like if it weren't healthy, right? A state of dysfunction, like a diabetic's pancreas. And is there anything that we can take from that would lead us to believe that we could fix it? So in a healthy pancreas, it's important to note that iron is an essential catalyst for energy exchange. Okay, so electron transport chain, the ETC, which is our mitochondria's main way, like the only way of it making energy for our cells, it uses iron. It uses iron as a catalyst for creating energy. Okay, not to mention the fact that iron binds the hemoglobin, that's kind of what it's famous for, and delivering oxygen to the cells. The oxygen that is delivered to the cells is used in that electron transport chain. So it's iron. Iron is so important. This is not an anti-iron campaign. This is restoring balance so that iron can be used the way it's supposed to. Okay. Now, this is just a diagram showing you visually how iron is supposed to be used in the cell. I do not expect anyone, including myself, to completely, understand the ins and outs of how the electron transport chain works in cellular respiration. But you can see here, just looking in that key at the bottom, these little doodads here are signifying the presence of iron, right? The iron sulfur complex. These complexes, all with iron in them, serve as catalysts for the mitochondria to do what it needs to do, right? So the mitochondria needs iron in order to produce energy. Now, because iron is synonymous with energy production, what does that mean when it comes to glucose metabolism? Because when we think of glucose metabolism, we also think of energy production, right? So because iron is necessary for iron production, when glucose is present, so is iron. So our body has a way of, when glucose is taken in, iron gets mobilized because your body knows, okay, glucose is here, it's time to make energy. Let me go get my iron to make sure that I have it ready to make that energy happen, right? So for glucose to be used, the cell needs iron, says it needs iron present to help catalyze respiration, okay? So you really can't use glucose without having iron there. You need them both. And now as a diabetic, when you think of taking glucose in, you think, oh, insulin, right? Insulin is the enzyme, the protein that is making sure that glucose can get into the cell where it can be used to create energy, right? So because insulin is required for glucose to get into the cell, and iron is needed to use that glucose properly, insulin and iron have a relationship together, okay? So when we take in glucose, our pancreas reads that, releases insulin. When our body releases insulin, that signifies our body to mobilize iron to be able to use it with the glucose that we just took in so that the cell can make energy. Okay? Let that sink in for a sec. Pause the video if you need to. So again, we've got this love triangle going on, right? So glucose, we eat it, leads to the insulin response, right? Insulin's released. That signifies iron needing to be taken in to make sure that our glucose is used. Make sense? So a healthy cell has all the tools to manage what it needs to do. So when you're thinking of beta cells, because that's what every diabetic is concerned with, the cells most responsible for correctly handling glucose metabolism are beta cells, right? That's not new information. In order to effectively handle glucose, our beta cells need to work. What do we need those beta cells to do? Well, we talked about that insulin release, iron mobilization connection, right? So beta cells recognize the intake of glucose. They release insulin. That, through a series of messengers, lets iron get mobilized so that it can be used. Now, that connection to iron gives beta cells the right to use a very special tool called hepcidin. Okay? If you want to know more about hepcidin, go back to episode 11 to learn more about iron homeostasis in a healthy body. So we're talking a little bit about it here too. So what does hepcidin do? Hepcidin is like the warden of the iron prison yard, right? It is the gatekeeper of letting iron into the cell or out of the cell, right? It is the one determining what balance looks like at any point in time. So it's deciding what's stored in the cell and what's being released into circulation, right? There's a ton of hepcidin in the liver, which makes sense because that's its main storage site. Hepcidin is what is determining if that liver knows to hold on to the iron or if it knows to release it into circulation. Now, an important note here is that alterations in hepcidin function leads to disease states, okay? So those with hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, which is too much serum ferritin, too much in the blood means that we aren't getting iron into the cell, right? So that means we have too little hepcidin. Now, there is another on the opposite the opposite side of the spectrum. If you have too much hepcidin and you keep pulling iron into the cell, that means you don't have any in the serum, right? This is called anemia of inflammation. And we'll talk about the mechanism of how that happens a little bit later in the episode. But Again, it's just important to note, hepcidin plays a critical role in iron balance. And iron, when it becomes imbalanced, either too high or too low, causes disease states. Let that sink in for a second. So this makes you wonder. Made me wonder. That's why I'm making this video. Have you ever wondered why diabetics don't experience complete pancreatic failure? Right? Why was it just the beta cells that were targeted? Diabetics have functioning alpha cells. We have functioning gamma cells. We have functioning delta cells. The beta cells were the only ones that were targeted and destroyed by the immune system. So what is a unique characteristic? We just hinted about it, and its connection to hepcidin. What makes the beta cells unique that cause them to be the recipient of this immune response, right? So why the beta cells? What do they have that the others don't? We kind of just answered it, but let's talk a little bit more about it. So it's important to go back to this, right? So a couple different things. So we're taking in too much iron, right? The added iron via enriched foods, supplements, and our water, among other things, right? So too much iron, as well as things that make inflammation worse, like PUFAs, like excess sugar, hydrogenated oils, all of that, as well as all of the, and that added on, as well as taking away all of the things that would keep those things in check. So when you look downstream from the liver, an overloaded liver, what are some of the organs that have a thing, a protein, that would make it more likely to take in iron? Maybe something like hepcidin, right? So beta cells were given special tools. They have special responsibilities, right, with that ability to use insulin. So those tools, i.e. hepcidin, that made it able to handle the insulin, glucose, iron capabilities, give it specific responsibilities when it comes to handling a volatile iron, right? Because we know iron's important, it's reactive, but it is a pro-oxidant. So if it is not handled correctly, there are dire consequences, right? So what happens in a state of iron dysregulation when the beta cells have hepcidin, and they're, do they know what to do? And what happens if there's too much iron in the body, where, like I was just mentioning, that excess iron starts to run the show? So hepcidin now becomes, which was once a gift, right? It's what gives beta cells the power to use glucose or have its insulin do what it needs to do, right? That is such an important part of our body's ability to use energy. If our pancreas didn't have hepcidin and it wasn't able to connect the dots between glucose and iron, we don't use energy as efficiently, right? It's really important. But that same hepcidin that allows for that properly mobilized iron to meet the energy demands of the cell can also become a bit of a problem in states of excess iron. Because what can hepcidin also do? It can release, but it can also lock that iron in its place. And we'll talk about how that can be an issue. Because if you remember, if there's too much iron, hepcidin sequesters that excess iron into storage to make sure that it is not just being released into the system where it can just be an oxidizing terror. This is good when the liver is doing the sequestering, right? Because the liver is equipped with all of the tools to store iron, make sure that it's bound and not doing anything it's not supposed to. But when that liver gets to a point where it starts to spill into other organs, the beta cells, now all of a sudden, with the blessing of hepcidin, now they have the tools to take on more iron than they're ready for, right? So now that extra iron that the liver can't hold gets sequestered into the beta cells. And at first, right, the beta cells have some means of handling small doses, right? Transient. It's just a minor mechanism to make sure that that iron is held onto before it can be released as that inflammation is taken care of. But when you think of all the things that are causing inflammation in our body, the excess iron in and of itself, as well as the other pro-oxidant aspects of the things that we're eating, hepcidin starts to lock iron in place as part of its protective mechanism against inflammation. So if you remember, too much hepcidin leads to anemia of inflammation. And this is a safety mechanism that on paper looks amazing. And there's like this minor detail, this minor caveat at the bottom that says, oh, by the way, in states of iron excess, it may make things worse. And no one has ever read that. So unbound iron makes inflammation worse. We know that. Hepcidin thinks that it's helping by taking in that unbound iron in the cell in a state of inflammation, right? So our body's inflamed. Hepcidin goes, oh, if you have a kitchen fire, your kitchen's on fire, you've got like flammable things. You're like, oh my, this iron is so flammable. I'm gonna like tuck this away. And in theory, that helps, right? If we just have, if we're sick, if we have an infection or something in our body, and we have all of these antibodies causing an inflammatory response, our body intentionally tries to mitigate the inflammation by taking any extra iron into the cell temporarily to avoid it making the initial inflammatory response worse. Okay? The thing is, if the source of the inflammation is iron itself, when the hepcidin goes, oh, let me protect us from this inflammation and draw this iron in, it's making things worse. So that extra retained iron leads to an inflammatory response within the cell. So now all this iron is locked in the beta cell. And it's just causing havoc. It is unbound. The beta cell does not have the means to properly bind the iron to make it not oxidize everything. And over time, that leads to cell death or ferroptosis. Ferroptosis is just a fancy word to say cell death by iron. So this is a huge, huge revelation. So because of beta cells' unique relationship with both glucose, right, and the release of insulin, and iron, mobilizing iron to make sure that that glucose can be used, it has the tools for handling iron that no other pancreas cell type has. That's the protein hepcidin. Hepcidin gives beta cells the ability and the responsibility of handling excess iron, right? Those states of inflammation where hepcidin does what it needs to decrease that inflammatory response. But that safety mechanism employed by hepcidin in an inflammatory state also puts beta cells at risk for destruction. Ergo, diabetes. So, wow. When I was reading this, it just, that all clicked so easily, right? So take a second to let that come in. But now, how do you address it, right? What are we supposed to do about it? First things first, you have to stop the intake of iron, right? Our body processes iron so efficiently and releases it so slowly that we need a way to bind any unbound iron and offload any extra iron that we already have, right? So we need to stop taking in excess iron, so no processed or enriched foods, right? If you're eating enriched wheat flour, it's enriched with reduced iron. And it's not enriched with any of the things that help it regulate the use of that iron. So no more pro-inflammatory foods, right? PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. That's hydrogenated oils, canola, sunflower, vegetables, soybean, all of those, garbage. And then chemical irritants. Are you filtering your water? Are you putting deodorant with aluminum on your body, right? We need to limit all of those things. In stopping that, we also need to start taking in the minerals that will help chelate and bind iron and restore balance to our iron regulation system. Trace minerals, chromium, manganese, selenium, those are all really, really important in making sure that your body handles heavy metals correctly. Copper. Copper is the ebb to iron's flow. We are way too high in iron, way too low in copper. And then all of the fat-soluble vitamins are so important for a healthy inflammatory response. And also in managing iron properly. There are direct ties between the antioxidant properties of vitamin E, vitamin A, and vitamin K and iron regulation. Donating blood. Donating blood is an easy way to offload extra iron, like upwards of 200 plus milligrams of iron in a single whole blood donation, right? Obviously, check with your doctor to make sure that you're eligible for it. I've been doing it now for over a year. It's the fastest and the easiest way. And you just have to be mindful of how often, right? You have to wait 2 months or so in between donations to make sure that you're building up enough hemoglobin and hematocrit for your health. You need to filter your water. There's heavy metals in your water. There's chlorine in your water. Okay. And then eating mineral dense food. You know, you ask yourself, well, Bowie, what am I supposed to eat? It's not as complicated as you think. Most vegetables, most fruits all have naturally occurring compounds that either counterbalance iron in the minerals that they offer or effectively chelate iron to deactivate it and make sure that it isn't absorbed. It's really not that much more complicated than eating more fruits and vegetables, grass-fed meat. There's just a lot of different ways. It's all about restoring balance. Natural foods are naturally balanced. And that's that. Supplement, and you can supplement initially to help close the deficit of the incredible imbalance that we've kind of all arrived at. All right. That's it. Okay. So this was a little bit faster, but damn it, it was dense. Okay. So I have a book documenting the entire process. I just released it a couple weeks ago. It's called An Ironclad Cause, Solving Diabetes and More. I will have it linked in the description. I encourage you, if this is of interest to you, and if you're diabetic, it should be, I implore that you read the book. The book outlines everything, basically, that this podcast is about to make you aware of what's happening and what you can do about it. All right. And if you're not already subscribed via YouTube, please, I welcome the more people that know about this, the better. And then via TikTok, follow my channel at Bowie_Madison. And let's cure this. I don't see any reason why we can't. All right. So again, this is episode 15, Diabetics for Diabetics Radio. I am your host, Bowie Madison. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Thank you. And have a great rest of your day.